And yes, sir. Let's see here. Check, check, check. Mic check, mic check. Check, check, check. Mic check, mic check. All right, the audio is good. Why is interracial dating still a topic? As you see on here, two of my favorite people, Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte, for two different reasons. Of course, Sidney Poitier, The Measure of a Man, or spiritual autobiography of Sidney Poitier there. Two very different reasons. So I liked when I read this, The Measure of a Man, how he dove into the personal experience. He said, my grandfather, Pa Tim, was a farmer, an extremely tall man who said few words, but was very close to my grandmother. I remember her better. And then he talks a little bit more about grandmother. He says, my grandmother lived just across the pond from our family. I remember my Aunt Yaya, who died after I left for Florida. I remember very well my Aunt Augusta, who also smoked a pipe, that same kind of white clay pipe from the olden days. That took me to a space where I hadn't been. See, that profound familiarity with grandfathers and such. But even him, Sidney Poitier, says he remembers his grandmother a little bit more. And I connect with the Sidney Poitier side. But Measure of a Man is an excellent book. I would recommend folks read that and check that out. Beyond the Sidney Poitier, as you see in the picture, he was the African American brother. And it seems like for me, like I'm having conversations with a lot of light-skinned African American men, men who may have had a different, unique set of circumstances that compel them to think the way that they think. And it seems to always be a point of contention or a point of debate. And who would I be as a part of the B1 network if I was not ready to take that debate head on? So that's what we will jump into on this. We won't go into the whole color dynamics of the conversations, their legacies, phenomenal careers. Let me give you at least one about Harry Belafonte. That line that they say about Martin Luther King Jr., I fear that we have integrated into a burning house. That was the man. So there's some deeper connectivity here, as you see in this image, the March on Washington, the replication from the A. Philip Randolph March on Washington that had preceded it by about 20 years before. But generationally, we have seen African-American media take a front seat in the social, political, and economic endeavors of America in general. And so for me, I am going to dive into this information head first. As you see from the date I started creating this content a few days back, I have a couple of slides here that I think go well into this point. And so we'll start there. I'll let you know that this title has changed no more than 3 or 4 times. It's gone from one that was directly having a conversation as a response to others to being one that I was just like, man, I'm gonna just put it out there. This is really what we're talking about again. And on the surface, it is still about interracial dating. It's still a conversation. It is literally still a conversation. And so we're gonna give them a little bit of information about that, and we will continue to move forward. Let me salute to those. B1 salute in the chat. Hey, Naima. Hey, Ishmoon. Hey, Nat. Brother Nubian. Dinubian. If the music, can you hear the music right now? If someone could let me know if that's coming in. That was one part of the sound check that I wasn't able to do. I did go over and join our brother Taz on his stream for a couple of hours there. Interesting as always. Those folks who are across the pond, like Sidney Poitier was referring to, that pond being over in England. And so no music. Wow. Why is it not giving me my sound quality? Well, it says that it's up. The brother Danubian, does the mic sound clear? Or was it just the music not coming forward? Let me know. It won't stop us from being able to move forward with the presentation. We do have other information that outside of the music that I was trying to incorporate into the slide, so it's not just my monologue going. Yeah, I wonder what that is. Oh, you know what? I got the volume on 6. Anyway, as you see there, save yourself, Black men. It is still about that. It is still about interracial dating. And I'm going to tell you about a time when save yourself, Black men. Like this one's weird. So it says save yourselves, Black men. So it has the double plural, but it is still talking from the individual. It should be save yourself would be SYS when you separate it out. And then Black man is how it should be written if you're talking to an individual. But because it's talking to the collective, then we're going to have that conversation from its social dynamics. On a personal level, I would tell you that the mixed family, the mixed interracial dating, it happens. It's there. There are people in my immediate family, like brothers who have pursued relationships outside of, with Black women. So the personal issue, not my concern. Don't care one way or the other. We have work to do. That takes the front seat. Let me run that one back again and let's make sure we can see that. Because what you see here was the Morehouse College. There we go. Hopefully that's a little louder. Give me that. Morehouse College being a prestigious HBCU, all African-American men graduating from the ages of around 21 to 22. This was our big fundraiser that we have, A Candle in the Dark. And as you see, the conversation around save yourself, Black men would primarily be geared towards these young men. So that's who it seems like the audience is. And because we've established a clear audience, we can go forward with developing the talking points that will make this conversation a little bit more productive into 2020. All right. And so first we have just a general premise. The focus of this presentation is restorative justice for the descendants of Black lynching in America. Stop right there. See, I know that there's a bigger concept that we can be talking about when it comes to even restorative justice. What just happened to my, there we go. I wasn't ready for you yet. Black lynching in America. We know that that's the microcosm of reparations. And then we also know that we can discuss this from the lens of specific examples. On this live stream, it will be to discuss Black veterans. And I give you two, Bud Johnson and Louis Till. There are others that will be included in the Prophet of Thought salute. There are others that we will be including, but for this information, we do want it to be concise and we do want to starting a point of origin so that if folks can at least have the conversation from the micro, the smaller one, then they can be able to broaden it out to the macro and understand. But let's start small with the hopes that once having this conversation, there will be those who say that's new information, that's valuable information. And I appreciate that information and to better prepare themselves to have this conversation in the future. All right. So we know W.E.B. Du Bois. Oh, you know what? I'm diving straight in. I don't even want to dive straight in. Here's what I actually want to do. I want to do like, brother, I'm going to pull a note out of Brother Taz's book. And what I am going to actually do is I'm going to give context first. So give me that luxury of about 10 minutes of context, and then we'll jump into the context and then the content. All right, so do collaborations work? Yes, YouTube collaborations do work. Essentially in the Black space, we find reasons of saying, you know, I don't want to deal with African Americans for whatever reason. Their segments are too small. They have a small sector. They don't have enough followers and such. What do you have? 491 subscribers. That was an addition of 89 in the last 28 days. Substantial amount of that 89, a substantial amount of that was just driven by this one video that you see here. So I'll show the analytics freely. That one video on the tenets of SYSBM received about 1.7 thousand views. Average duration was almost 30 minutes. Watch time of 729 collective minutes. So that was the biggest video in the year 2019 for Brother Moses. It was the one that actually had the equipment involved, and it was the one that was actually promoted immediately after or during the end section of another YouTube content creator's video. So they said, oh, we're going over to Brother Moses, B1 Network, Brother Moses. He's going to carry on and we'll break down these tenets. And then the people that were on that channel, which is Taz exclusive to Go, the B1 Network, they came over. And so you saw those numbers. That at its peak was around 130 folks that were there. Folks, you know, it was a very long, drawn out stream because there were a lot of tenets, like 23 of them that we broke down. We had a lot of guests from around the YouTube sector come and chime in and support me on that. So I definitely appreciate it. It does show the results. Look, dealing with African Americans, don't let that stigma fool you that Black business doesn't work. And it is contingent upon us to develop our own marketing, find our own businesses, Black folks that we can actually drive business to and for and in partnership and collaboration with. So that was my one show your work. As you see, active community guideline strikes. I only have one warning so far, but again, I have very few videos that I've even published so far. So the next thing was the content. I hate that I'm so objective, but I will be objective. The reason why I hate being objective is because I bring the focus onto what they're doing. And for me, I don't even agree with what the hell they're talking about in the first place, but I am objective. They talk about it from the lens of Negro Wars, the book. I'm a veteran, and when we broke down their tenets, I told you the thing that was the most triggering to me is that they use language about knights. They use language about the brotherhood. They use language that's coded in almost warfare, almost like a veteran status. And the book that they all refer to is from Babatunde Umana, which is Negro Wars. So I have to give you that in order for you to understand why I say restorative justice for Black veterans who were lynched. I got to give you that. See, if you're part of the B1 network, I know that you already know that. But again, this is for those people when you're having that conversation with them and they seem not to understand. And so you got to give them a micro example, a very small example to help broaden them. I mean, and to help broaden them out to where they can see something more than. So when we talk about Negro Wars, we're talking about the real ones. Like even to this day, the modern anti-lynching bill, they will not pass it. They will not pass the modern day lynching bill. And because of that tension or that animosity, we have to continue to be vigilant. We know that there are the militant groups that are still out there. There is still the representation of over 150 different clan segment organizations that are still operating and thriving here in America, that they don't need a sheet to be militant, and we're not waiting and reactive and responsive to them. We have a duty to ourselves, and that's what I believe is important to uphold here. So the Negro Wars, they said a short and critical examination of the modern day Black woman. Do you see how they hijacked the movement? One of the biggest and most damning things about that their entire movement or their principles is how they've co-opted other people's effective strategies for political gain, and they made it a personal attack against the Black woman. Now, I don't have to cape against all Black women. I'll just let the data, I don't have to cape for Black women. There's no big all thing with Brother Moses. I'll tell you, man, I listen to the music that says bitches ain't shit. So don't let that fool you. There is no halo above my head. So when we're having that conversation with them, though, and they're spreading this rhetoric, we'll say, look, the media, the image, and all of that shit, they're like, man, you're equivocating. So again, we have to placate and try to give them the actual numbers. Numbers like this is what we actually presented when you started to examining the interracial relationships, and one of their talking points is that they have a higher likelihood of success, I guess, in the world when dealing with women who are not African-American women. We wanted to debunk that. I won't go all the way into it, just giving you a bit of a recap. So while I was formulating that, I thought I'd give a little bit of context around Harry Belafonte. I was going into it. I was just like, damn, do I give this to them or do I just tell them? Civil rights movement, 1950s and 60s. He was the close confidant of Martin Luther King Jr. Again, the one who, when Martin Luther King Jr. said, I feel we have integrated into a burning building, that's who he was talking to. Why is that important? Civil rights is the linchpin of the era that they are actually referring to. The 60s civil rights movement, not the 1860s where Moses is typically having conversations about. I'll say the 1960s is the era where they're saying Black women started to move away from the Black household and into a space of dependence on the state and a willingness to work with the state more than they were willing to work with the African-American man. I disagree, which is why I have the content that I'm presenting today. But while I was doing my homework, I got to give you a little bit of the context. I've been getting distracted. So the man with no neck, who says that he is the only black media presenting this type of content, was actually interviewing, I would say, a mentor, executive mentor for that same part, John Hope Bryant of Minds. Let's see if we can get some value on this just a little bit.
Black freedom movement, so-called civil rights movement, the economic part is what's always left out.
Right.
When people recount Dr. King's "I have a..."
You remember when we did the tenets over, I said the economics, how does economics fall to number 11 out of all of your tenets that you're going to be espousing as a philosophy, while saying that pro-black is whack and pro-black business, pro-black media, pro-black communities, all of that shit is whack. Man, come on, bro. I can get understanding being scorned, having tried having to join an association or feeling like you're not a part of an association. I can understand that resentment or feeling like an outcast and all of that shit. I get it. But if your tenets or your philosophy now push economics to number 11 as your primary philosophy or tenet, then it's not one that can be followed, and it's not one for the growth of any man. And I wish that it was not available for black men, but because it is, you'll get a little bit of pushback for Brother Moses, and I'm gonna get back to the content. But I like this part.
Not even what the actual name of the speech was. Normalcy never again was it. But everybody focuses on the part where he said, like, let's hold hands, we can get along, and little black.
Somebody missed that. It wasn't about I have a dream. It wasn't a pontification. It wasn't just oration or rhetoric. It was about normalcy never again. It was an affirmation for us not to go back to that agrarian lifestyle, but to not settle for the failed unions that weren't able to deliver the jobs that we needed, nor to settle for the over-policing that was happening in our communities. It was still about that jobs initiatives. That's what Brother Moses is saying. You would have to push back against Brother Moses. But normalcy never again is the actual name of that speech. I'll carry on.
Boys, little black girls.
You talking about a check.
But he was right. He was talking about it was a radical economic speech.
Yeah.
That's enough. We'll keep going. I know that guy is one of those, I guess he comes from that doxing community where they'll report your channel. Even though I'm resharing the same information, I can hit the reshare button. But if I do it in a live stream, they feel like I'm infringing on their right to collect monetization from it. I disagree with that as well. I do not have a monetized channel. This information is free to the public. Even the images that are being used are already in the public domain and currently being calculated. I like John Hope Bryant, and I also like Andrew Young. Andrew Young is one of those people who kind of hijacked the movement. Again, it was black male leadership. It was one of an opposing view. One that said, look, I know you want to focus on the social dynamics of what's wrong with black and white race relations. But while you work on that, we have another agenda that I would like to push. So you had one that was separatist. That was the Nation of Islam, their own land, their own spaces, their own doctrine. Get away. You had one that was integrationalist. And then you had one that was integrationalist subsection economics. It won't be the social and all of that social endeavors. It will be economics. That was Andrew Young Jr. I had the privilege of actually being able to meet the guy. Definitely seems stand up. Also like to point out that it was another graduate of Howard University, just like our brother O'Shea, who attended Howard University, and Yvette Carnell, Howard University, so many others. One of the brother or sister school HBCUs that have an impact. So again, CEO John Hope Bryant is the founder of this organization, which is Hope in a Box. Always referencing his executive mentor. The role of Hope in a Box is financial literacy in the underserved communities or the black communities. He's one of those folks who does believe in the whole underserved and diverse talent and the way of phraseology. He's not the pro-black, but still does pro-black shit. You can tell that he's not pro-black. There is diversity in his board. But if you looked at the actual organization itself, what you would notice is the amount of African American as the form of diversity in the board. So definitely wanted to point that out. Not a part of the B1 network by any means. Not necessary by any means, because I understand that economics is something for someone else to pursue. I work in the space of economics, and I see just how big of a fight that is, which is why I say when folks want to come to the Brother Moses channel, if they do want to hop on the panel, have something that helps sharpen Brother Moses to have the conversations with the people in that finance space. We can talk about the social and all of that shit all day, every day, but this is what Brother Moses's ask would be. All right. And so since we're talking about the civil rights, I did want to jump in. People like to say, well, it was Martin Luther King Jr. who sold us out with the integrationalist movement and all that. I do want that to be viewed as just one sector. But even Martin Luther King Jr. had mentors and influences like Benjamin Mays, who said low aim is sin. Civil rights activists who were following in the vein of A. Philip Randolph or arguing with A. Philip Randolph like 20 years prior when they did the March on Washington. So that gets you all the way back into the late 40s and 30s. But the John Lewis, the Rosa Parks, more vigilant than what Martin Luther King was, ready to fight and bust heads, was like the John Lewis. The arrest records prove it. The assault, the violence, all of that, what they would call hyper masculinity in some spaces. The Rosa Parks initiative was more NAACP driven. We need a court case. So that's legal precedent. That is a battle on the legal front. Malcolm X, again, as I've mentioned, Stokely Carmichael, being able to take that and make it more national by those memberships in the Black Panther Party and things. A. Philip Randolph, as I've mentioned, and then Andrew Young. Why do I keep mentioning A. Philip Randolph? Again, his friend Chandler Owen founded The Messenger. That is Black media. We are talking about ideas or concepts between Black media going back and forth and what you do with your media. And so out of all of those people that I showed on the previous slide, they had Black as their primary political agenda, economic agenda, social agenda. So what are these Negroes doing today? What's wrong with these Negroes? Pook, what's wrong with a Midtown? 1917. This is going to be critical in this analysis that I give you a little bit later. But the magazine's intelligent and spirited prose criticized President Woodrow Wilson as readily as Booker T. Washington. Where else do you find that but the B1 network? Well, we'll talk about your president. We'll talk about your congressional Black Congress member. If we don't feel like their actions are aligning, then we're going to speak about it. And people look at that as we're the challenge. No, we have some serious issues that will be addressed. Its approval of the Bolshevik Revolution was cited by various government watchdogs during the Red Scare of 1919. Put a bullet note there, because who do they say are controlled by the Russian bots? Who do they? Anyway, I'll keep moving forward with that. I won't even let that linger. Another one of the people that I look to, I love music, would be the Quincy Jones. Whether you agree with the interracial dating, you can pull interracial dating from any of those pictures, photos, concepts. You can pull an interracial dating dynamic or a sexual selection dynamic from any of them. From the Andrew Youngs to the Sidney Poitier and his white wives to the Harry Belafonte, who was of mixed descent. That's why I try to stay away from it. That's why that is not my cream and butter. We can talk about it, but that is a personal decision. It does have social ramifications, but it doesn't really stretch to the institutional criteria that I use. I use those three criteria. Are you talking from a lens of what personal, or from one of social dynamics, the different groups, or one of institutional? All right. And so, because I like Quincy Jones, just wanted to give a couple of the topics. This is media that wanted to cross over into mainstream media. It is the music. You can look at the different titles that they used, but the critical time period is what I was referring to. Somebody who was creating and executing at a high level, even in their own music lane, which is cultural or art lane, against the odds during the 60s. So they would have to listen to more of this before they can have the conversation with Brother Moses, because it doesn't seem like they've developed a thorough understanding of that Black perspective. And because of that, I have to talk to that white guy that's been lingering inside of their head. See, they think that it was the African-American woman who has held back progress or has aligned with white supremacy against the Black men. And while I showed you all of those African-American leaders who were running successful and effective agendas, whether you agree with them or not, their argument are not for the Black men and the Black male leadership. Their argument is that the Black woman hijacked it, that the Black woman is doing the thing. So again, I wanted to go into this story about Strom Thurmond, segregationalist politician, I think I have a little bit of content about him later. Just wanted to introduce what I will be talking about as we move forward. I do expect that folks would have a thorough knowledge of Booker T. Washington, even all the way into the interracial dynamic after his black wife had passed. And so, because of that, be ready for that. Well, Booker T. Washington dated white, or Booker T. Washington wouldn't have been as successful as he could have been without white abolitionists. So they take the power and the courage of the African American to be whom he was during this critical time period, and they give it back to white folks. Again, be willing to have that conversation and be willing to let them know about the different media that were used and how they are using theirs. Washington was a key proponent of the African American businesses and one of the founders of the National Negro Business League. So it's not a new concept of, look, the social dynamic is one element, but let's talk economics. He gave a speech known as the Atlanta Compromise, and it is at the root of most of their argument about accountability. It is the pull yourself up by your bootstraps argument. Someone who was not against him, but had a differing opinion and a different media. See, that was business and economics, the National Negro Business. And this was the Niagara movement. You can still pull out your trace examples of interracial, whatever it is. But what it does is it invalidates the narratives of these African-American men leaders. The Crisis, for example, was the newspaper or the form of media that they used to communicate, similar to what we would call our YouTube or our YouTube, Black Manosphere, whatever that section was. This was W.E.B. Du Bois's medium or way of communicating. And I just like this one little section here. I won't go all the way into Du Bois. That is prerequisite knowledge. If you ask them about W.B. Du Bois and what they know about Du Bois, and they ask them about what is their opinion on his position on, Black liberation or whatever that might be, see where it is. See if they tell you the talented 10th. If they don't answer about the talented 10th and education as a political strategy to overcome oppression in America, then there's something wrong with them. They are not on an intellectual level to have that debate. So you might as well talk about hair and fingernail polish with those men. They're just not there. Again, so the NAACP era that was brought in, the Pan-Africanism and Marcus Garvey, how that was brought in, the Harlem Renaissance, how that was effective at influencing culture. Influencing culture is important because that helps people in their personal lives as they cope with whatever they're coping with, the music that we listen to, the places where we can go, the social dynamics. So being a part of that group. But again, launching that as a pathway to institutional change. Don't get lost. So we went into it, just wanted to show a little bit about the crisis. I was like, damn, people don't believe that you can do a Google search, find the person. If it brings you to the Wikipedia, what's important about the Wikipedia is your ability to use it and to develop your content. So from there, well, let's find the actual newspapers. Where are those newspapers available? See, don't expect the people to have the conversation from this level of thorough research. Just don't expect it. Don't expect them to actually find the digitized copies of the crisis to be able to have a conversation with you about media as a form of institutional change. Don't expect it. The digitized versions from the era that they are referring to and before. Do not expect them to go the lengths of newspapers.com and to be able to pull adequate sources. Just don't do it. That's putting too much on it. I love boxing. Shout out Gervonta Tank Davis. I was holding my breath for 2 hours as the guy didn't make weight. His championship is on the line. He needs those belts. He doesn't really need them. He's going to be a good fighter anyway. But for our recognition, we want our Black fighters to have the belts. And I am not ashamed to say that. Like, if you look here, you will see Jack Johnson, champion. There is a legacy of that. And I would rather us have it than to have that conversation around, no, well, anyone can have it. I'm waiting for an Asian to be the world champion boxer of the heavyweight division. I'm waiting on a Vietnamese person or the people who like to root for Pacquiao. Miss me with that bullshit. Tank Davis did make weight. for those who love boxing. And so let's get it on. They were going to fight anyway, but we want that championship. We want that title to be in our names. So I'm showing you that I have actual resources. I'm not going to go through this and show them the actual newspaper clippings or the articles from the time period, but I will tell them newspaper.com, nigga, look it up. I won't even say Google it no more. I will say when you're looking for articles that verify conditions during the time period that you're relating to, don't tell me black women hijacked the women's suffrage movement and left the black men unless you're willing to do this research. Don't tell me that. I take that shit literal. I put in too much work for you to discredit this entire momentum that we have right now with more black people shaming. I'm not ready to go into this one just yet. I will. But as you see, our conversation will hit race riots in 1999 and 1919 because we got to give them the information. Their fear is actually of lynching. And so now I bring you back. I've given you part one, which is the premise. I've given you the context. And now I'm going to deliver on part three, which is the actual content developed by Brother Moses. And damn it, even when I was creating it, it was larger on my other screen. So bear with me. Hopefully you're able to see some of this as it comes through. A good thing that I did was actually add a lot more photos so that it can run. But I'll recap this slide again, and then we will move forward. The focus of this presentation is restorative justice for descendants of black lynching in America. For descendants of black lynching in America. That is one straightforward focus that if they don't agree with anything else, they ought to agree with that. They can't talk to me about justice, can't talk to me about democracy. You can't talk to me about anything along those lines. You can't use language about veterans. You can't use language about militants or any of those levels. The brotherhood, round table, we are knights. You can't use any of that language unless you are ready to have this conversation without your double talk. Because if you talk about any of that shit, then I'm going to direct you right back to this information. The African Americans who were lynched here in America, and they didn't get no damn forms of justice. And I'm going to tell you that it is not just Brother Moses who's saying have this conversation. And I'll give you a couple of examples here. But again, nephew, I will punch you right in the middle of your forehead because you are mine. Do you hear me? Take your ass upstairs. And you better dry them hands too, little nasty fucker. Anyway. W.E.B. Du Bois, The Crisis with the Print Media During This Era. Sourced below. There's a digital collection stored by the University of California, Davis. You know I'm from Northern California, so I'm not telling you what I don't know. I'm telling you about the sources to help you. And this is what you tell them. I'm telling you about the sources to help you educate yourself because you obviously don't want to listen to me. You obviously just have a problem with the fact that it comes from me. And because of that, I'll give you the sources to look up the information that disproves your own claims. All right. Information is shared here for educational purpose. The description is an early 20th century news article clip, likely published by the NAACP. Their author or the person who was taking the pictures was unidentified. It was accessed a couple of days ago by Brother Moses of the BlackFirstMediaNetwork.com. I did that just to show Google and YouTube that I do know how to source the material, but that it takes too long to do all of that. I could have been halfway through the damn presentation if I didn't have to source the information. Part one. Lynching. And then you'll see right under that, it says burned alive in the United States in 1919. Why is that important? Because they are talking about burning the black community down. And with their language, we cannot assume that they are not saying literally burning the black community down. And when they said it, according to their tenets, they were referring to the black community as the black woman. So the burning of the black woman, is this a threat against the person, the black woman, or is this just the talking points? See, I'm not playing no games with these people. The burning of the black community was a literal thing. The war was a literal thing. The murder was a literal thing, or the destruction of the ashes was a literal thing that they are using and hijacking and co-opting. Should I say more? It lists 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And instead of me giving you 5, I only give you 1 from this list and 1 as a FYI. But if you were a part of the B1 network for real, unlike these clowns, then you would have understood even here that there is a story about Elaine, Arkansas as well, as previously presented, that they may have missed. See, when B1 Taz presents about Elaine, Arkansas, Moses didn't know that. So Moses says that's cool. But then Moses also takes that information and does more research for Moses, because Moses has to fight his own battles out here. That is the true definition of save yourself, black man. That I am giving you information as a warning and as an alert to your conscience that you are being too complacent as you move through these spaces. That the real violence and those who are perpetrated against you, they are real people, not a figment of your imagination. This state that they run from is a real state. And that's who they want to run from. Like it says, save yourself, black man. What are you running from? What are you running from, or what are you running to? That would be my question. And if their response is that they are running from the African-American woman because she has been psychologically traumatizing them, physically abusing them, and these are their claims that they would publish, and this is what they are sharing through our media of today. This isn't the crisis, but the name crisis lets you gets you a little bit closer to what I'm trying to tell you. Is going down in the A. I should have got my plane ticket and flew out there as a representative just to shake my brother Javante Tank Davis's hand, just to take a selfie, post it on Instagram, and send it to those who I work with every day. Give me a sec. Now this is going to be a little bit rude. Hey, I got to call you back, bro.
Are you on the game?
Not yet. I'll be on in a few.
All right.
Rock with y'all on that civilization. Peace, bro. All right, burned alive in the United States in 1919. I put that there because it's going to be a critical lens. The information that I showed you where I found it from, I sorted it, I cited it. I will not keep going back and citing the information. I showed you that it's newspaper clippings and articles. All I was able to do is grab a screenshot, whiten it up so that it fits and looks good on this page. This slideshow will be available, I think, in a blog format that makes it a little bit more accessible for other people. That's a growth opportunity for me, is to move it into a blog for those few who would want to be able to access this information. Read it from the top. It says the directors of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, 75th Avenue, New York City, so Harlem Renaissance, remember, feel constrained to publish to the world certain facts with regard to the treatment of Negroes in the United States. Do you see where Brother Moses is bringing nothing but the relevant content? This is exactly what we're talking about in media. Where I hate to do it, I feel constrained, but I have to give you information, certain facts in regard to the treatment of Negroes in the United States, not the treatment of Negroes by their women, but the treatment of Negroes in the United States. Despite appeals to civil authorities and public opinion, barbarous excesses continue to be practiced against colored Americans. In the year 1919, 84 persons were murdered by mobs or lynched, of whom 78 were Negroes and 11 were publicly burned alive. In the 30 years, 1889 to 1918, lynching mobs murdered 3,224 persons in the United States. The number of white and colored persons lynched in the United States. Excuse me, I actually liked it. That came on. From 1889 to 1919, they put in asterisks there and they mapped it out year by year from 1889 to 1890. Now, with my content, I'm not here yet. I typically don't have conversations that are already in the 1889s and the Ku Klux Klan and all of that shit. I'm not here yet. But since we're talking about anti-miscegenation and people who want to discuss interracial dating, we have to speak to where they're psychologically traumatized at. They fear the lynching, and thus they want access to white women without reprisal from white men. 1889, the total was 175, 95 colored. I'll take the colored line and go all the way down. 88, 127, 155, 114, 128, 110, 79, 124, 103, 87, 89, 108, 84, 87, and then 79, all the way through 1904 instances where white mobs went and murdered and lynched African Americans. So restorative justice, we're not even there yet for more than 3,000 families that had to be raised without that father in the household. That's necessary with that uncle, with that trauma. And because they don't want to have those conversations, I guess Brother Moses has to. Midtown Pookie says those numbers are lying. Let's cut the music off and keep them going. 1916, 1917, 1918, and then 1919, 51, 48, 63, and 78 more respectively. Now you're into 1919, which is the premise, as you might know, when the NAACP was actually created, the Urban League and things like that. When did you start to see some of our Divine Nine start to grow their membership? When did you see black male leadership start to step up and confront white supremacy? When were black males guiding the principle of our dialogue through their media? When were they shaping our perspectives and the stereotypes of black men? When did they find that? All right. This is the time period that they're referring to. So as you see here, Midtown, it says the victims of race riots have been excluded from this table. So this number is an underestimate, because if they had for any reason to say that this was a race riot, then they did not feel the need to include it in this data. Again, if it wasn't a race riot, then they didn't include it in this data. Not to mention, they're not just saying murders. This is talking about mobs that were gathered for the explicit intent to go and kill somebody, a black man. In many cases, this is mob violent lynching. All right, not just a regular standard. You stepped on my shoe, and I don't like when people step on my shoe. I challenge you to an Aaron Burr duel, and we're gonna duel it out in the middle of the street. No, we're talking specifics. We can get it big. We can go bigger later if they can agree on the small premise. Those instances where hundreds or thousands of white people gathered together, 3,300, 2,600 that they attribute directly to the black man and what the black man has done. Those cases, reparations for black lynched men, that is the primary focus. Remember, we can get bigger later, but we got to give them a starting point, because if they're not even willing to accept this, then there is no reason to have a conversation with them on anything bigger than that. Their personal racism is too strong. You will not overcome that obstacle. The white man in their head has them by the balls. All right. Somebody said in the chat a little bit earlier, they are cowards. That cowardism is ripe. Like the woman a little bit earlier who said, if a black woman was like that, I would be afraid for my life. That's what she said. And they like to throw that out there, that white woman tendency. I don't argue with white women, because I can't tell that white woman that she's not really afraid, because to that white woman, she says those things. I was afraid. They assaulted me. I feared for my life. If that white woman on the panel a little bit earlier that I just left, which is probably still going on Taz Exclusives channel, that woman who said she is biracial, she says she checks on a box mixed, that she does not identify with black, but comes to black spaces to provide a perspective as a mixed white woman who does not agree. Came to our spaces and listened to a black woman from Oakland and said, oh, she's the representative of black women. She represents everything that those men, cis-bim men, talk about black men need to save themselves from. So she's supporting their narrative. After 2 or 3 hours of giving nothing but heat content, that, look, you're just hijacking other people's talking points and trying to make them sound good to where it seems like you know, if you can touch somebody here on accountability, whatever, accountability. So now you got them. And then the other one was their own personal experience with child support. And so you got them, people giving you fire signs in the chat. No, that's not what we do here. The black woman is not what you're saving yourself from. And if you are, then pity you, run as fast as you can. Just go over there. But in our spaces of black leadership and black media and black leadership using black media, that's just not the message that I feel needs the hours and countless hours of content to cover it. I am Lucy. I'm going to come to that too. I am glad that she said it, but she said exactly what happened even in this generation. When I said that psychology of that black man who they want access to the white women, but they don't want the punitive damages. They don't want the consequences if the white men disagree with how they treat that white woman. They want to go to spaces overseas where there is less consequences. This is what she said, and she was the representative of them. Now, if they wanted to come and have that conversation, the link was in the chat. They didn't. And when we have the conversation with them, we tell them the same thing. You want to go to spaces where you're subordinate to other men, other civilizations, other groups of people. We have the conversation around us and how we are in it for ourselves. What can we do? Or individually, even if you want to be one of those individual people. Craig Harper has a business. He can say, all of our businesses, but at the end of the day, Craig Harper has to make his business successful. So that independent lens as well. That business mind does not eradicate your blackness, though. It is when you eradicate your blackness that business mind is no longer any good for the collective. I'm gonna keep going because as you see on that very top circle there, damn, I should have made that even bigger as well. There's a lot that I'm looking at. So I got my laptop on the right so I can view what the content looks like. And then I actually have my share screen on the left. And I'll take that because it helps me determine what size font I need. I have it created in blog. The settings are on for a blog, for like a website or for someone's phone. So it's created in PowerPoint to where someone can actually slide their thumb like they would with their mobile phone. So I can share it mobile to mobile. And this slideshow presentation is just sliding down and you'll see all the highlights and you can read it that way. But to be displayed online, it's not the best look. I still got to work on transitioning information from one medium to the other medium. But the top one says women and girls lynched by states 1889 to 1919. The fact that they presented information about women and girls does not mean that women and girls were hijacking the black movement. That was in order to call out the barbarity that was the experience here in America for people of color. And when people hijack that entire conversation because they can't stay focused, they'll end up talking about, oh no, well, women being lynched is different from men being lynched. And they'll go along down that lane of thought that I can't even follow it. But as you see there, when it comes to the white children, those numbers are significantly lower. There wasn't that crime of black men going and targeting, or even white men for that part, going and targeting the kids and the women like there was and still is for the colored women. Can you see that? That is the actual fact that the African-American woman did not have the luxury of protection. She was targeted and the kids were targeted for lynching. Mobs, groups of people, white people coming together to kill you, breaking you out of jail to do it, breaking you out of a hospital to do it. The National Guard could not stand up against the size of those lynch mobs that were coming to invade and to kidnap and brutalize those black bodies. And because they did not have that luxury of feeling like they were in a safe space, those black women and those black children naturally got harder. What information were they passing along as grandmothers and as aunties to the children that followed them? Was it, oh no, you just need to talk a little bit softer and maybe those white people won't kill you. If you beg and plead for some sympathy, they won't kill you. I'm telling you that information that I've researched does not bear out that argument. Maybe that's a scarecrow. Maybe the save yourself black men that they use is a scarecrow in itself. I digress. The very bottom one I had to call out as well, lynching in the United States in 1919. So it started off with the data back to 1889, showed you the thousands of cases. This is the restorative justice claim that one might make. And you ask them, would they be willing to discuss reparations for those victims of black lynching? And if they say no to even that, then you would just ask a simple question like you'll always hear me ask, why? Why not? Why would you not be for it? All right, so the information does break down a little bit further, We're gonna put that linchpin right here in 1919. And for those who are already a part of the B1 network, you probably already know why that was a crucial year. The case of Bud Johnson is Florida. There's also Georgia, as I told you, Andrew Young, and so many other countless examples of black male leadership. Tuskegee, Alabama, and all of those places. Arkansas, which has already been covered by Taz. But though that leadership and the people that I showed you from the premise and the context, they operated in these spaces where these lynchings were occurring. These are the grandbabies of that era. And when they stood up with black male rigor. They knew what it was. And then the very bottom, the manner of lynching was as follows: burned, 14, 11 before death, 3 after death, shot, hanged, beaten to death, cut to pieces, drowned, or a manner unknown. Manner unknown, remember that one, because that is a whole new subgenre or a new category all in itself now. These people who want to be the unknown, weird ass people. So again, NAACP said, even in the year 1919, we hate to have to inform you of this barbarity that's African Americans are experiencing here in America. There was 84 murders. I'm gonna give you, they gave them since 1889, there's been more than 2,000, more than 2,500 just for black folks. And in the year 1919, there was 84, and then they break it down by state. All right, so the manner of lynching was as follows: burned. So these people, burn, baby, burn is one of their talking points. Burn the black community down, let it burn. You'll hear that, and you will see them in those chats, and you'll see them having that conversation as if this wasn't the actual reality that black men and black women and black children experience here in America. So let's go deeper on that. The colored men who served in the World War lynched during 1919. March 4th, Bud Johnson, taken from officers and burned to death by a mob, said to have confessed to attack on who? A white woman, somebody like Miss Jessica, who was just in that other chat, who says, I would feel assaulted, I would feel unsafe, I would feel threatened just by someone's conversation. And they use that, and they use it in their white spaces. She can come to black spaces, she could come to where black people are and feel threatened and take that back to her other spaces where those men then react with violence. All right. There's one right underneath that, said to have confessed to an attack on a white woman. April 9th, Mississippi was another one, said to have admitted to have hired a woman to write an insulting note to a white woman. So lynched because you hired a woman to write an insulting note to a white woman. What do they want to do? They want to shut your channel down if you have a conversation and say, look, you don't identify as black. This is a space for black people who want to put black ideas, black issues, black thought first. Why are you here? And they'll come and call us the racists for having conversations about historical racism. They'll say you all sound like racists, you sound angry, you sound all of these things for having conversations about historical. And the only reason why we have to bring up historical racism is because of the trauma that these men are running from. That we say, no, if you ever dealt with that fear that you have, you might be able to move forward as a more successful black person. That would check most of this shit that you fear at the door. Because you realize that there were black men who were no longer afraid, who said, well, man, it's time to stand the fuck up. See, not everybody said, well, let's just focus on economics. Not everybody said, well, let's just focus on, other social dynamics. Not everybody said, well, let's just focus on, if we just go to church. Not everybody said, look, if we just individually pull ourselves up. But there were African-American soldiers who served in all of these wars, coming back from World War I, who were still lynched. And they ain't getting no reparations, no justice claim, no justice filed from the Department of Justice for Veterans, Department of Defense, none of that shit. No further investigation. They wrote a note about a white woman. They put it in a Snapchat. They wrote it on a super chat. They wrote a note. Or they confessed to an attack on a white woman. They confessed retroactively to what that white woman said. And thus they were murdered by the end of a mob. Newspaper clipping on the very bottom. I'll read it because it is a little bit blurry, and for those who may be watching on their phones. March 14th, Bud Johnson, a Negro who, according to the officers, admitted he had attacked a well-known white woman at Pace, Florida, was taken from Sheriff Harville at Castleberry early today and burned to death near the scene of his alleged crime. There is no burn, baby, burn that I would allow to operate in my space. No, it just won't happen. It is just not going to happen. Drop a bomb on that shit, because maybe they don't actually believe this shit at all. Maybe be that like I've heard a couple of people start to say now, Brother Moses be talking about that bullshit. He just goes on and pontificates about this and that and no, motherfucker, pull the newspaper clip for them. Pull the and add the pictures for those folks who don't want to read it. Pull the actual newspaper clip as published by Black media. See, they can shut down Black media spaces where we can do article after article whenever white female fuckery happens, whenever there's another mass shooting, whenever there's another big major crime, a big drug bust, and you see what that is. But this is what Black media was doing even then. What are they doing? I have no idea, but this is what I'm going to continue to deliver. Even that very last picture, I'll just speak to the cartoon because I've already read the newspaper clipping. Of course, I could read more of that newspaper article, but why bother? Let them read it for themselves. Then they might believe it. And even then they would still say, yeah, so that has nothing to do with me. So as you see on that very bottom clip, there is that crow, or the representation of Jim Crow, still sitting on a post. A post is something that is driven into the ground to be firm. Firm meaning that they wanted it to last for a while. What was the message that they put on this firm fixture inside of their community that sits underneath Jim Crow? Do I talk too fast? Or was that entire analogy something that was likely to go right over somebody's head? This firm fixture that sits underneath Jim Crow. What does the message say that they wanted to endear? It says, notice, all colored soldiers must stay out of white YMCA at Camp Upton by order of the commanding officer. Why was that important? So you got to understand here, these soldiers get off, they got the guns, the rifles, the training, they got the experience, they've traveled and done what they've done. And now that I've done so and I'm back in America, that mentality to push back is one that is still, contrary to folks. That mentality to push back, man, motherfucker, I'm gonna go where the fuck I want to go. I've served my country. They've gotten a little bit bolder, like Negroes with a higher income, as one might say, that bougie class. They got a little bit bolder in their rhetoric and in the spaces that they would occupy. They began to push back. And in this event, it says a little bit more, but the African-American Bud Johnson then went into a space where he was supposedly not allowed and tried to have that conversation. Damn, that sounds eerily familiar. A space that had been carved out and reserved for white people, or for a race-based space carved out where they put an order down. And this person tries to go there and get some pushback. What was the pushback? They said, well, he assaulted a white woman. In this case, we know that sexual assault is one of those things that we would want to protect Black men from. And in case they missed it on this same newspaper article, if they don't believe that fighting is important, I actually added a hyperlink to the Jack Johnson versus Jess Willard fight, where Jack Johnson was going up against his head, very lighthearted, very mannered, lost this fight, by the way. This was, I think, 1915, I think, when this actual fight actually occurred, or this video footage to show you that this is very real and still very true. Let's go, Javante Tank Davis. But that we were fighting on a number of different fronts. And on this one, the allegation was that Jack Johnson, through the fight, he didn't even try to knock out Jess Willard, that he was in there playing. And they used as evidence, they said he tried to bet on himself. He tried to bet 10,000. He tried to bet on the fight 10,000, but was only able to bet 2,500. He denied it, of course, but that is the slander that they throw at our champions when they want to knock our champions down a peg, or when they feel like our champions are not parroting the message that they would like our champions to parrot. So you thought I was talking in circles. No, we have a bigger fight. Jack Johnson understood that. And this was right underneath the article clipping of Bud Johnson, who actually just, I swear to God, I be talking too fast. Or maybe they listen too slow. Them Johnson boys wasn't playing with them niggas no more. Let me move forward before I start getting, like they like to call it, passionate. Oh, that brother is so passionate. That brother is so passionate. This is media. This is footage. And they would probably tell me that I would get a copyright strike for sharing this footage that they've just shared. I ain't even going to show you the fight. We can go into the fight, but I could show you that fight of that black man putting them hands on that on the other guy, because there was a significant fight and they hated Johnson for it. They hated the Johnsons in general. We going to move forward because we are talking about ours. These veterans and the restorative justice for veterans who were lynched. You see them. They in the photo right now. They dapper deer. These is my guys right here. These is my guys. I never knew any of them, never knew any of their descendants, but these is my dudes right here. They come in all the shades and hues, the different features, from the black eyebrow to the big broad nose to the what they call the jawline, nigga, and all of that. The broad shoulders that had to carry the entire world on their shoulders. All of them. If you look in the very top right corner, it gets as light as Xanatos clutch, but it did not absolve him of his blackness. Institutionally, he was still assigned to a colored regiment. Once he got out, he was still in a segregated society. He was still fighting for his right to exist, not for gender neutrality, not for access to white women. They list there, this was from the Wikipedia that I just clipped and dropped it right there for those folks, because as you see on the very bottom picture, the one that is the most triggering is the actual burning of the African American. That is what we're talking about here, and they won't identify it if you say reparations. If you say restorative justice, maybe they'll listen, but they have a funny way of discussing justice. Be on alert for that already. And then afterwards, damn, how do I give Xander nephew a damn wrench so I don't have to? There we go. There you go, nephew. Drop it again. Hopefully this time it won't have to be moderated. You ought to be able to go right on through with it, Xander. So a black veteran and a black woman, Pickens, that was Holmes County, Mississippi. They'll tell you what we already know about Mississippi, but do you know about the alleged crime? Insult of white woman. Black woman wrote an improper note to the young white woman. Robert Truitt, Louis of Humphreys County, Mississippi, July 15th, 1919. Also in 1919, I'm telling you, you have to be able to stay focused. They think Moses be going everywhere, but I am still right here in 1919. The insult of white woman, alleged indecent proposal to a white woman. So the insult, the assault, the I was afraid, the he threatened me, all of those things were punishable by death. Clinton Briggs, Lincoln, Washington, Arkansas, August 3rd, 1919. The insult of a white woman moved too slowly out of the white woman's way. So when you have these check boxes who come into black spaces, they come in wanting us to apologize to them because they still operate from this mind state that says even the insult of a white woman should be punishable by death. And I'm not going to apologize for saying that shit. Story after story with 2,600 that were lynched for that same narrative that they're parroting and defending and caping for. I would tell you that, look here, you got all the media that you already needed. It just takes every once in a while, we got to bring this shit out. John Hartford will be lynched by the Ellisville mob at 5 o'clock this afternoon. That is the norm, the lynching of a Negro. Governor Bilbo says, so from the top levels of white leadership, says he is powerless to prevent it. Thousands of people, so they don't get it out of perspective. You tell them thousands of people were gathering to come and participate in the murder of an African-American man. And where's the restorative justice? Is that just? See, when you ask them questions like that, they'll tell you, well, what, you know, the pro-blacks and they're all radical and all of that shit. That's what they want the conversation to go, is down military science. So they can say, well, black people are advocating, you know, they are identity. That's what they want to say, because they don't want to hold accountability for what we're actually telling them. The psychological trauma that has been impacted is not from the black woman. The psychological trauma is probably due to domestic terrorism that even targeted our veterans. That is a fact. I don't know how to say Hattiesburg, but Midtown, I appreciate it. Hattiesburg, I think I'm getting it right. But as you see on that next clip, Hattiesburg, June 26th, John Harper, the Negro alleged to have assaulted an Ellisville young woman, has been taken to Ellisville and is guarded by officers in the office of Dr. Carter. You see, they put all of that information out there right there using their media. If you would have had an African American that said, George Zimmerman is being guarded by police at this news station, he'll be transported from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock. Guess which side our American government would have sided on? They would have came and got your black ass for saying it. They would have came and got you. They would have called you the problem. They would have forgotten all about the false allegation, about the murder that was about to occur or had occurred. They would have forgot about all of that and made it about you and your response to these either microaggressions or the actual racism, overt in your face racism. They want you to lose your talking point and talk about something other than this. So they regarded, the officers have agreed to turn him over to the people of the city at 4 o'clock. That is your government. That is your state. When they say, well, the state, the black woman is empowered by the state and she works for this, that is your state that turned over the African American to those thousands of people gathered with the expressed intent to kill that person. The Negro is said to have made a partial confession. I mean, you can keep moving. 3,000 will burn Negro. New Orleans, where do you want to go? Louisiana, Arkansas, Alabama? We can give you the information for whatever state you say your people were raised in. We can give you the information for the state. What we can't do is give you the numbers of domestic terrorism today. That is the only thing that I've actually liked about what Candace Owens has said. Where are the numbers from the people who have access to those numbers? And then the stories at the very bottom where the mob kills a preacher. So you can't hide in a church. They will burn your church down. They will bomb your church. They will do that same thing unequivocally. That where is the justice for it? They still haven't reconciled. Negro minister shot when he resists arrest. Pursuers of Milhern on trial for a murderer. Victim of the mob was accused of harboring and aiding. So just having that person there or having them on your platform, look, that they're fair game. They are fair game. What upper? That very bottom one, on the very left. So that very bottom left corner where there is some highlight. Just wanted to call it out. A Negro preacher was shot to death when he resisted arrest at his home in a Negro settlement. I thought that was important because you'll start hearing more. And in 2020, you'll hear a hell of a lot more about these Negro settlements and these cities, these small towns or whatever it was, where African Americans had their own settlements, their own spaces, their own hospitals, their own streets, roads, whatever it is, schools, their own systems, their own. You'll start hearing more of that. I promise you, you will. All right, and then the one in the middle, which is the one that was also big, a man burned alive. This one, this is the, if there was nothing else that I would want them to leave with, it would be this one in the middle. Today, a man burned alive, not in Prussia, here in America, and a lady applauds. That one was deep. We Americans in the proud and civilized state of Tennessee have just burned a Negro to death. That is the double talk when it talks about what is civilized and what does it mean to be classy and what does it mean to be a lady and what is all of that shit. The lady applauds as a man was burned to death and calls it the proud and civilized state in the same sentence, which is why I don't deal with the white one. There is no way that I would ever recommend that these men have to deal with these white women on an interpersonal or intrapersonal level. The charred body to relatives, they just send you the remaining fragments of bone inside of a jar with ashes. Burn, baby, burn is the talking point of these folks. Not that black veterans are owed restorative justice for these lynchings that have happened in our community. And the individual audience members will decide which information most resonates with them and in which context they would have that information. So I'll tell you like this: access does not equal consent. Because you have access to white women does not mean you have their consent to disempower them from their whiteness. And so these black men who want to voluntarily do it should know about this story here. Lewis Till, father of Emmett Till, was executed by the United States Army in 1945. Alleged crime? You guessed it. Citation right there at the top. This is the father of Emmett Till. Everybody could tell you about the story of Emmett Till. Not too many people can tell you that his father was a part of the United States Army, was also hung 10 years before Emmett Till. John Edgar Wideman is one of the sources that I used, but I wanted to make this content blog style and available to others. So I wrote it in article format. As you see here, this is my language that I am going to take the executive privilege of reading here today for those who are watching via their mobile device and the font size is too small. At the core of interracial dating is a perceived fear of rejection. Deeper, though, a legacy of racial violence towards blacks. So you have to equate that rejection and that racial violence. They don't want to be rejected by white men, and therefore, anyway, that's why they want access to white women without the consequence of all of this lynching. In 2018, the Justice Department decided to reopen investigations into Till's death and other racially motivated crimes from our past. Bing, 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 bing. This is not just a Brother Moses. While you have movement in the area of ADOS and opening up history and finding avenues that where we can find common ground for restorative justice, it's not just Brother Moses. This is the Justice Department in 2018. According to biography.com, many Americans are rightly afraid of that. The ones who are not afraid of, mostly not afraid of it, would be the black folks. Black folks could probably tell you, yeah, it would be just. Out of all of those 2,600 cases that the NAACP reports and their families and their descendants, how many of them actually found justice? Now, out of all of those mobs that were actually formed and those people who participated guilty by association for killing those folks, watching and participating, breaking them out of the prisons and killing those people, where was the justice? Where was the justice? You already know if you're B1 where they're going to go when you ask them that. See, I just want to give people a little bit of information that they might not know already. They might not have known about Emmett Till's father. Alleged crime, you guessed it. Rape or assault or attack on a white woman. Insult. So at the core, this is what we're dealing with. Arthur Buckley says it best, that Southern justice blamed the son for the sins of the father. Stop right there. Southern justice blamed the son for the sins of the father. Now, if Southern justice is one that is violent and murder and all of that, pull them out of the system and go kill them. I don't even want to go there, but if that is your form of Southern justice, how do you then ask for our society to be civilized? How do you then look at the African-American experience reactively to this environment and say the Black American is at fault? The Black American is too aggressive. The Black American needs to be more docile. The Black American needs to be more civil. No, as a response to thousands of people coming to your grandmother's house, thousands of people coming to your grandfather's house, if they hadn't already lynched your grandmother or your grandfather, however you want to word it, and attempting to snatch you, your uncles, whatever men were in that house out and kill them, and our reaction to that, and we're the ones who need to be checked for it, miss me with that bullshit. But recounting the sins of Southern Oh, sorry, recounting the lynching of 14-year-old Emmett Till in 1955 by Mississippi racists. The fact is, 10 years before Emmett was fished out of that Tallahatchie, 23-year-old Lewis Till was executed by a racist American military system. Buckley continued. He validates this critique of institutional racism, referencing the John Edgar Wideman book listed above. In World War II, black servicemen abroad faced racial violence in the form of capital punishment. Lewis Till is just one example. According to Wideman, for Americans deployed in France, there was a certain cemetery where executed servicemen were buried. There was a certain cemetery, Plot E, is where Lewis Till in France is buried, and that was a place for executed servicemen or men who had been killed due to capital punishment. He says there are 96 graves, 83, Wideman writes, are for colored men. So even an African American who decides to do their patriotic duty and join the military and serves abroad still faced racial violence in the form of lynching. There's no other way around it. Save yourself, black man. You could not escape even to the military. And even thinking that you could escape to the military, even when they deployed you to another country, one that's said to have had favorable relations with blacks, you could still be lynched. Save yourself from who? The father and son murders are testament to American injustice and deserve a properly administered justice for all that all Americans expect, not just black. So on that one, it's B1 to say that black Americans expect, but it is more B1 in this context or of this sentence to say all Americans expect real justice to be administered. They were hung and killed by a mob of people. If a mob of people go to a white church and snatch out some white man, there is probably more black people who would condemn that action. Stop the double talk. The 1,000 people or hundreds of people going anywhere and snatching that person and killing them is wrong and an injustice. It is not civil. It is injustice. And we aren't the ones who should be told to be more docile. Yeah, I didn't want to go back to the anti-miscegenation laws of the 1600s and all of that, and white folks' access and their fragile egos of the white woman moving that white man into a space of what is it, ultimatum, and their exercising of divine right in the world, but at home their white woman was saying you can't have sex with slaves. And so the propertization of the black and that whole line of thought, I didn't want to go back that far. And in fact, I typically only stay around the 1860s because there is enough research that can be extrapolated just from that era when it comes to restorative justice or a claim for restorative justice and reparations. So I typically stick there. This is just another one for today's conversation, interracial dating. And a lot of people think that I'm still moving away from interracial dating, but the man was in France and they said that it was an interracial interactivity. So let me move on. Let me move forward. I mean, they were executed with sketchy details of interracial interaction and questionable execution of justice at trial. For Father Till, no evidence was presented, not the woman's testimony, not the other that. And in fact, even the witness said that it was a white man. So lo and behold, oh, let me give you one more for those people who feel like I just be pulling out random facts. Lewis Till was actually a boxer as well. I love Jack Johnson, but Lewis Till was the boxer as well. So anyway, and that's when I actually found the information. But moving forward, and for the son, which is Emmett Till, that everyone knows about that story already, there was no prosecution for the murderers. The reason why people know about the son is because of black media and that Jet magazine. They really know about it primarily, though, because of the defiance of Mamie Till, that mother, the mother who, when after they had did this barbaric act to this child, and I told you on a slide before, this was about children that they were attacking as well, and women. But this one example of the child, Emmett Till, the mother. So the state was like, this is Mississippi again. They was like, you better close that casket and bury that little kid immediately. She was like, hell no. And my son will not be buried here in Mississippi. She sent them back up to Chicago, opened up that casket, and that image was the one that was published by whom? the Jet magazine. Right there on the cover of Jet magazine. So how can black media be influential? Well, it depends on which paradigms they are operating from. If they are operating from a black first lens, then of course they can have impact 50, 60, 70 years later as black media. But if their only talking points will be the natural selection or the sexual selection competition, then they probably won't be effective as black media. They would be the schmut genre, you know, that romance novel or all of that shit for the questionable black men who love romance novels about black women, I guess. I don't know, whatever the fuck they doing. It's neither here nor there for me, which is why I just say we disagree. So I'm going to take a quick music break, check on my wife, check on my kids. Thanks for rocking. There are 17 in the chat with us right now. And so this is from my guy, CRU. I've been asking for this content for a little bit of a minute. So let me add a little bit of volume. Y'all let me know in the chat if that volume is coming up. Give me one more. Let me do this. Let me go back up, come back down. And why do you still seem like you're low? Does the audio come forward? That is my question to anyone in the chat who can help me out with that information right there. Does the audio from the music come forward? Let me know. I'm not done yet. No, that was a quick little interlude from my guy. And we're back. Part 2. Because they excluded the information, we have to be inclusive of that information. Part 2. Remember, the number 2,600 was the number of lynchings that excluded race riots. Now we're telling you that there were thousands of mobs, thousands in their mob that was coming, but it wasn't included in this data is when the African Americans started lynching up too. In 2020, you will hear a hell of a lot more about those black spaces, and you'll also stop getting this one-sided narrative that says, and black folks sat there and took that shit on the chin, because it's just not the truth. Race riots. Again, this is reactive. This is a response to the aggressions that had been enacted against black men. But at some point, they were like, enough is enough. They give a few examples here. B1 Brother Taz already told y'all about Elaine, Arkansas. But it is the year 1919. So I'm not deflecting and I'm not running from this information. Give me one sec. What else can I do? Can I do that here? Do I actually want to go all the way through on that one? Let me see. That one. Do I want to jump to this one? Yeah, I don't want to do it this way, whatever I do. There we go. All right, so let's do it this way. The race riots in 1919, globalsecurity.org is the source of this information. I don't want to just put it all in my words. I do want to be able to give you some information that can resonate with you. All right, so race riots 1919, an increased desire and urgency of many African Americans for fully equality. Damn, they can't even write. For full equality came with the participation in World War I and the Great Migration of more than 1 million blacks by 1918. So again, that participation in the military was not escapism. Access to white women was not consent. You did not have the authority from that white man to try to act any given governing way with their daughters. They were being lynched, and as such, black men started to push back against it. For the most part, black folks were only dealing exclusively with black folks, as we know, but just to give them your save yourself black men premise, I will let them know that. They left for those jobs, left the South, which was an agrarian lifestyle, and they went up north where it was more industrialized in spaces. So north and west, places like Chicago, of course. During this time, Marcus Garvey, a Jamaican activist, introduced an alternative to integration espoused by the NAACP. On August 1st, 1914, Garvey founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association. So what is that? You got African Americans who could either get their media from the NAACP, which is talented 10th, how do we go to school, education, and all of that. Or you had that pull yourself up by your bootstrap argument if you were still rocking with the Booker T. Washington of the time. You had Marcus Garvey saying, well, look, fuck both of those. Universal Negro Improvement Association says if we want to be successful, we need to separate ourselves. So there are a lot of different forms of media that was even available to the African Americans there at that time. There was the Crisis, there was the Messenger, there was all of these different publications that were getting that message out of Black leadership using media. And the one that we are arguing for is one that says pro-Black. As we saw, pro-Black was written all throughout their manifesto. And so it's only right that a pro-Black responds to that. I didn't even know that we were on their radar like that, but why the fuck they blaming us? Anyway, here you go. Garvey then, with that separatist movement that attracted a lower social and economic level of Blacks than the NAACP. Hold that. A lower social and economic level of Blacks. In 2020, you will hear them, just like in 2019, regurgitate information that the B1 network is for the Pookie and the Ray Ray. It's for the ratchet and whore. It's for the lower rungs of society, socially and economically. All right. You hear those talking points all the damn time. And they said that the NAACP promoted Black social and moral independence within white society. So acceptance, go along to get along, get you that corporate job, maintain it, you know, do all of those things. That other us, that one that wants Black. But even here, though, they wanted African Americans or Black folks to find success. Them being a part of the white society was an adjacency. It wasn't, they wanted African Americans to become white society. That's a different position. Still rocking with me? So Garvey exalted race pride in everything Black. He received the wide following that offered the best testimony to the sense of betrayal, the war, and the aftermath kindled in Black communities. So it was only so much of these soldiers coming home getting killed that even the African Americans were willing to tolerate. So the importation of 1 million Negroes in the northern states to fill the places of white artisans and laborers drafted to the Great War had its tragic sequel in the race riots, which occurred during July and September 1919 in 4 cities: Washington, Chicago, Omaha, and Elaine, Arkansas. Taz gave you Elaine, Arkansas. I did a little bit of extra research. We can jump into Washington, Chicago, and Omaha. I'm thinking that it's probably best just to refer folks to the Elaine, Arkansas timepiece. That date stamp should ride. In 3 of the 4 cities, except Chicago, regular Army troops were required to restore order. I'm thinking that we could just stick with the Elaine, Arkansas one and not have to go all the way into the details of Washington, Chicago, and Omaha. That you should be able to give them Elaine, Arkansas, because that's the new information. You should be able to give them Lewis Till, which is the father of Emmett Till, who was also hung, a veteran. Why? Because these are some of the small issues or the nuances of conversation that they may not know. And if you can enlighten them, hopefully they can listen long enough to be able to get back to the real topic. Black liberation, I would say, or Black freedoms as we would want to experience them. So overall, Black hopes for equality were diminished in the summer of 1919. That marked a new watershed in racial disturbances that spread like wildfire across the nation. These riots, resulting in 62 deaths and hundreds of injuries, were in part due to Negro assurance based upon the wide acceptance among the Blacks of the doctrine of the social equality of the races as enunciated by Negro editors. So again, the media having an influence, those Negro editors, if you followed the NAACP, they were talking about talented 10th, and they were saying that leadership has been educated and therefore they have the best course for African Americans, and they had an agenda. If you followed the Going Back to Africa, they said that was a lower rung, social and economic rung, which is most of the folks that we would be referring to. But in whichever one that you followed, whether it was reading the Crisis or reading the Messenger, today it's like the Chicago Tribune or the New York Times or whoever it is that you might actually read if it was print media. Today in YouTube space, it would be B1 or Conscious Community, or the religious ones. There's a number of different platforms that one might go to, but based on what media you consume was the message that resounded with you. On this case, there was a doctrine for social equality. There was a doctrine for social equality of the races that was enunciated by Negro editors. We are, as Black YouTube, the Negro editors of today. Other contributing causes were the alleged assaults committed by blacks upon white girls and the industrial enmities engendered by the transplanting of these blacks on northern soil, displacing white men, not only from the positions of lucrative employment, but disposing them from their homes as well. So when Brother Moses tells you that that access to white girls is what they're pursuing, and that that white girl that made up the bulk of the women's suffrage movement that they want to call the feminist movement, as it evolved over time, it was because those white girls wanted autonomy from those white men, displacing white men not only from positions of lucrative employment, but dispositioning them from their homes. Those white men did not have control of their daughters, those white girls, and access to those white girls was not the primary driver. It was a result. Contributing causes, though, was that did he actually assault, rape, or commit an insult, something like that, to a white girl, for those black men who were actually trying to mix races? Hopefully that's clear. For those African American men, those save yourself black men who were looking to mix races, they did not want problems with the white men because those white men were lynching. And I still feel to this day, don't trust that system, bro. Because there are still those whites who are still there waiting and lying in wait, is what it's called, to take advantage of those lost black men who are out there trying to mix the race. And they and for that reason, I don't think that I should read any more of this context. I think you got enough in how it's relevant to this case. The riots in Washington and what happened, the colored citizens when they fought back. To go into that would have to be with like someone like Brother George Macon, or somebody who actually talks about, these riots where African American men pushed back in some of the crimes that the murders or the theft, the property damage, all of that, when black people said enough is enough. I don't think that they're on that level. I think that that would move the conversation to a space of being too uncomfortable for them to have a conversation that's really on the grounds of militant and all of that. So I'm going to tell them that it's there. I'm going to show them where I got it from. And then I'm going to tell them they can do the research for themselves if they would be interested in that. But that is that conversation. Why is that important? It is the 100-year anniversary of those 1919 race riots. And I'm not afraid to talk to you about them. Now, that's something that you can say to white folks, to black folks, to Mexicans, Asians, or whatever. But once we got to that critical junction where African-American men, they were writing about it, they were blogging, I guess you want to say, about it, if that's our terminology for today. But when they were using media to influence, and media was influential, they were using it as a platform to say enough is enough. And they knew exactly who enough is enough was guided towards. They knew exactly who they were referring to when they were saying enough is enough. All right. In many of these instances, you will see that they had to call out the National Guard, or they were deputizing people. I've told you in the 1860s, they were committees, vigilante committees that they would bring together, which is essentially find all the men in your neighborhood and all of y'all come out with y'all pistols and we marching over there and we gonna get it down. So they talking about how those riots then swept through Chicago. So you can't tell me about that Chicago Negro or that uppity little Negro, Emmett Till, who was a Chicagoan, and then went down to Mississippi, and the Mississippi, or the Southern justice, form of justice, and how it impacted us. That's just the information that's prerequisite to have that conversation. All right. The burning of the buildings, the burn, baby, burn was a real thing, not some perceived talking point. All right. And so I think I'm coming up on my last couple of slides here. But what phrase is often used to measure success? I'm sure even on your screens here, as I'm looking on it from multiple screens, I am able to read it pretty clearly there. And my screen is not even in the big one. So I think this is probably the right size for content moving forward. Then I'll open up the other section, the other side. Yep, that's pretty clear. Damn, for me, it's still a little blurry. I wonder why that is. Anyway, when you're looking at progress, what their number one rebuttal will always be this one. This is the one that they come back to. And what you see on the left side, that was then, and this is now. That is their number one rebuttal. When they try to diminish then, they try to make then smaller or less significant, less important than what is happening now. All right. So they say this is now, and they try to make this and the now even bigger or interconnected or not connected to what was happening back then. All right. Said by most debaters. And because we know that they're going to do that, B1 Network then provides the data to show that no, it wasn't just then, it is still something that carried over. You don't have the conversation around institutional racism. You try to have the conversation and restrict it to the lens of personal racism, whether or not a white woman likes you or not. Does a white woman have the ability to like an African-American man? That's not what Brother Moses has the conversation on. That doesn't even meet the threshold of moving into the social racism. So as a group, do white people collectively view black people as, trustworthy, hardworking and all of that shit? The social racism, let alone institutional racism, which is the combination or the conjoining of all of those systems that make a society run. Very top chart. High school graduates. Oh, wait, did this shit already flow over? Let me see. Let me go up and then come back down just to make sure I'm not behind my own. All right. High school graduates as a percentage of the 17-year-old population from 1910 to 2010. Why was this important? Because one of those black school of thought, NAACP, if you know W.E.B. Du Bois, was the talented 10th. This was all of America. 1910 to 2010. Again, I'm at 1920 is what we're bringing. So around 2020, it was less than 20%, which means 1 out of 5 people. How are you going to extract a talented 10th when you don't even have 10% of your entire demographic as a country that is educated? 10% of your entire nation had a high school diploma. I'll say it one more time. 10% of the entire nation had a high school diploma. You'll start to measure that progress over time, or the more literacy rates and the more mathematical, quantifying, rationalizing men and women, I guess you can say that if you want to do that, moved from 20 to 1930. But in a segment, you start seeing the rate of increase of literacy or a high school diploma starts to grow a little bit faster than it did from 1910 to 1920. 1930 to 1940, you see a significant spike. So if you're not talking about institutional racism, then I can't even talk to you about the child labor laws. Because that's an institutional thing that changed. Something happened in a paradigm where those kids and the migration, moving people out of the farm, where even, I don't want to jump the gun, but even today, there are certain requirements around age and a legal age to work. And when did those laws start to come in place? And if they weren't working, then that gave those kids a different avenue, right? So now that you're actually in school more consistently, you should see a corresponding increase in the graduation rate from high school. And that's when those laws were passed. 1940 to 1950, you see it almost flatline. It moves up around 10%. Why? Because that is that very real era where you have African Americans saying separate but equal accommodations aren't working. So which of these eras are they talking about where the black woman hijacked the movement of men and took over the black community? I just don't see that happening. 1950 to 1960, it's a little bit better than the flat line before then. But then 1960 to 1970, a little bit better than the flat line before then. And then now after 1970, you start seeing it decline from its high at around 80% after the 70s. Up and down from there off of our educated workforce. What does that do? Number one, it helps to debunk this myth that because W.E.B. Du Bois said it, the talented 10th, that was the avenue that people were determining they should go down. As you see by the data, they still weren't going to school. That was just one person's position. They had the crisis in the NAACP. It was a part of the Niagara movement and all of those other different things that you want to bring out. but it did not matriculate into institutional change or even social change. Like they like to call it, an intellectual circle jerk. It went absolutely nowhere until you had some, after 1919, you'll start seeing that increase start to rise. Figure 2, the one in the middle, is a percentage of people. Let me make sure we still got this. Oh, I did want to blow it out a little bit bigger so that folks will be able to see that. Let me make sure that's still rocking and clear. All right, blow it out a little bit bigger. So between 1910 and 1920, the rate of increase was 1/10, which is a reflection of that same talking point, a talented tenth, or saying those who have the education should make the decision. It's the equivalent of the Pookie and Ray Ray versus the educated lame argument. 1920 to 1930, it was around 2 out of 10 people. So 8 people that you'd be having a conversation with were not on an intellectual plane to have this information presented to them. That is just the facts. 1930 to 1940, we see the Great Migration from the agrarian South, the Jim Crow South, the Southern Justice, as they were calling it earlier. And then you'll see World War II. So World War I happened, 1920 to 1930. You get back, you have men willing to fight, 1919 race riots, and then you start seeing some increases. Education, you better get your little ass in school. 60% benchmark was finally hit after the 1950s. What happened in the 50s? Don't forget Brown versus Board of Education is always a good one. And then 1960s was culminated in that integrationalist Civil Rights Era Act, the one that had the trade-offs between education and labor. So what are we saying here? Look at this from a lens of generations, right? Damn, yeah, I scheduled this as if I was going to be able to talk super fast. High school completion or higher, and then you move into bachelor's degree or higher for the middle section. The bachelor's degrees are higher. That is a very small fraction. That wasn't even the 10th or the 10% mark. Oops, my bad. I'm tripping on my controls. On my cell phone, I can just press down and it goes down, or I can still zoom in. So I'm still getting familiar with it. But anyway, 1930, 1940, 1950, 1960, not until 1970 did a bachelor's degree or a talented 10th ideology actually start to resonate. And again, this is all America for those all America folks. This isn't even the data or information just specific to blacks. But if this is a representation of all of America, one might only imagine how undereducated we actually were. We just did not have access to that level of information. The resources that a college might have, the data sets or the libraries. There are no computers here, but what libraries did you actually have in this era where you can get the information? Wanted to break it down there even deeper. The great grandparents of millennials. So I want them to personalize it. I'm a millennial, so my great grandparents migrated out of the South due to the separate but equal laws. Civil rights leadership made significant political gains against racism. Don't forget Brown versus Board. That was that next era, but that is the era of my parents, which is why that is the second box. And then finally, those late bloomers and baby boomers gave birth to the millennials who push America past the 50% benchmark in education. I was born in the 80s, so therefore I'm finally in that generation that pushes education as a staple in American society. It has not been up until that point, as you see. And so what do you see there on the very bottom one? Oh shit, that shit moves super fast. Yeah, I am not able to keep up with my own slides. The very bottom one, let's have this conversation from the lens that they would like to have it from. If black women hijacked it or women hijacked it, does the information bear it out? That would start at about the 60s. So you've moved from black women's suffrage into this feminist movement actually getting some traction. What percentage of that black woman was even in the labor force? All the way through 1960, the percentage of women in the labor force itself was 35%. All right. That was a long statement to make. There is so much information that has to be debunked. If you were only participating in the labor force at 35%, then there is no way you can tell me you had political power that undermined, that was able to take away from what your men were doing in your communities. It just doesn't happen. The earnings of 60 cents on a dollar remained stagnant all the way through the late 80s. So past my generation, Participation in the labor force for women didn't really pass the 50 mark until around 1982. That is millennials. That is the children of the children of the children. You're going way deep in after so many years of not having access to either the education, as you see, or the labor force, where until the 1980s is where that woman is finally 50%. Now she is half of America, and then 50% now in the labor force. And at that time, still earning around 60 cents on the dollar for the African-American man. So when we broke it down for the African-American men and the median income of the male black household versus the others, we already presented that information. They didn't receive it as valid, I guess. They needed something more for them. And so I'll show them that if they weren't talking about any of these time periods, then they must be talking about a millennial black girl, a black woman. And thus you're mad at this millennial black girl because you can't have her by not being, and then also not able to connect to any of the context that precluded her parents and her parents' parents and her parents' parents that made her harder than you. Can't relate to it. That the black woman, black American, has a unique lifestyle that makes her harder than them niggas. You know, with that shit one more time, and then I'm allow it to just move on forward. The great grandparents of millennials migrated out of the South due to those separate but equal laws, that agrarian, that tenant farming, sharecropping, boll weevils, what the Mississippi flood, like so many different things happened. African Americans took themselves out of that South and started moving to places like Chicago, Los Angeles, Oakland, even as you start moving into the 40s and looking at the war as escapism from what they were experiencing in the form of racial equality or racial inequality or injustice in the South. So save yourself, black men, was not about evading the black woman. It was about getting over some of those other areas. I feel like this shit is redundant. National agenda is set by the educated and owner class. Debunk the fuck out of that. Blacks migrating from the agrarian South achieved significant political gains from civil rights. Those agrarians in the South, I don't know. There's an up and down on what was significant in their political gains. I could talk about a little bit more, but at this point, I'm almost disinterested in even debunking their talking points. I don't know how Taz does it, but I'll hold off for about 10 more minutes, I guess. However, those gains were mostly in labor and education. They were not in gender equality, as we saw with education and economics. The money that the woman makes was 60 cents on a dollar all the way through the 80s. And that's now you're talking about the oldest millennials then. It definitely wasn't gender equality. So where do these talking points come from? I would tell you that their positions are still attempting to align with historical racism and a white nationalist propaganda machine. That the tenets of that system lifestyle are conflicted. Its pseudo philosophy creates a false narrative that black women, not racism, destroyed the community. And of course, I disagree. That the save yourself black men should be save yourself black man at the very least. Save yourselves black men is the plural, but yourselves would then be one word. So SYB in those syntax. All right. So a little bit of information. I said I would go into it, but Southern politicians assumed that they could force candidates to turn against civil rights. Civil rights at the time, the anti-lynching bill was the #1 bill. I'm sorry to tell you, the anti-lynching bill, the right to not be lynched, was the #1 bill that they kept shooting down. It was either that or child labor. So unionization, who can work, where you can work, how much you can earn when you're working for those places. Those were the major issues of the day. That was the black male agenda. Who could work, where they could work, how much they earned when they worked there, and the conditions or the treatment that they faced in general public, in general. It was not about interracial dating, although that was something that was happening in the very small anomaly sectors where you had those delusional black men who had lost themselves. At the time, it was still punishable by death, anti-lynching being a bill that they knocked down time after time to this day. So the black agenda was more about equal protection under, also taking a piece of that equal protection under the law and said that that should not be extended to women, which they're going to have the conversation. I will not be willing to have that conversation with anybody that's less than a decision maker in this system organization, meaning you got to have a lot of subscribers or people, a very famous section of that space for me to have that conversation around equal protection under the law not being extended to black women. I'm gonna have to understand where that argument originates. And that's the bottom line, that black women should not have equal protection under the law, specifically because they're black and they're mean to me. The fuck out of here. They're taking that personal racism or that personal bias and they're making it about the damn black woman, an institutional thing. So another thing about this, on the phone or the mobile application that's created of this same content, as you can stream down, that it is hyperlinked. So I didn't just quote the sources and things, but I actually linked the sources inside of it. So you can click those ones and find it as well. As we get better with media, we have to make sure that we're leveraging multiple forms of technology to make it as seamless a process as it can be. Not everybody will have, a couple of hours to listen to a live stream. And some people do still read. So they want to make sure that we can cater to them as well. They can double click, get the information, see it, be like, speed read through it, get back to the damn presentation. So that's what's built in here. And I tested it for myself that it does work. The next thing would be, how do I distribute that medium? Oh, sorry. The bottom part, segregationist politician Strom Thurmond is known for the longest filibuster in history, the number one and the number two filibuster in history, as he sat there to oppose the civil rights movement or the civil rights for blacks. He did so in his time as a veteran, as a service member. He opposed black and the integrated military and equal justice for black soldiers as well as white soldiers, all of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. He opposed it as a military person or a service member. He opposed it as a senator there in his state. He opposed it as a judge in his state. He opposed it as a governor, and then opposed it as a U.S. senator. So all the way back into those mid-30s, all the way through the Civil Rights Act of the later years, that was Strom Thurmond. I don't like to call him a gentleman from, but that's who it is. But maybe the fact that the feminist movement and debunking the feminist movement and its traction and the black woman being able to hijack it, maybe that's not enough. And they're saying, yeah, but you're still talking about old shit. And so I could point out at almost the beginning where I say, well, the Department of Justice is considering reopening these investigations into these crimes, these heinous acts of barbarism from the past. Or maybe I can just give them another one. Gradualism. Data emerges to support JFK era Equal Rights Committee recommendations. Equal Rights Committee recommendations. They love Bobby. Well, let's talk about John. In 1962, President John F. Kennedy authorized the Committee on Equal Opportunity in the Armed Forces to examine racism. They assessed what measures should be taken to improve the effectiveness of military policy on equality and to improve equality of access to opportunity for members of their family for housing, education, programs, promotions, recreation, so forth. What happened? So after these veterans had been lynched and murdered and they were still operating in societies where they couldn't go to a grocery store and eating at a restaurant, you had to eat at the back of the restaurant and all of that, and moved through the 40s. They moved into the northern spaces and they were trying to get jobs, and the unions came in to try to help more get jobs and affordable lifestyle or houses and all of that shit. Chicago, Los Angeles, the other war that came in and kicked up, more people moving and just trying to find access. They realized that, look, racism is ripe even throughout our military. 1962, President Kennedy authorized a committee to investigate it, equal opportunity or whatever it is. After that investigation, they were looking for certain key things. How can we improve? Improve, which is what they say. What are the solutions? And then after they hit you with what are the solutions, you'll typically, damn, did this pause? Am I off? Man, keep up. Oh, Matt. My bad. There we go. All right. So out of all of those different measures that they were taking, economically, do we separate? Do we stay together? Is it economics? Is it social? What do we focus on as our media? A lot of it's social, which I understand. They finally got some political action here with the ear of the representative or whatever black leader had the conversation with John F. Kennedy. They authorized that committee. Of their findings, there was one recommendation that relates to anti-miscegenation. So I went through that entire thing just to see if I could find the information. Like, when did this start happening? That recommendation was to build biracial community working spaces. I'll say it again. That recommendation from the 1960s was to build biracial community working spaces, or spaces that are safer for biracials, spaces where they can carve out uniquely for biracials who don't identify as black or white. They now can fall into this new demographic called other, multi, or unknown. Now, another recommendation allowed boycotts and bans on local businesses that denied black service members patronage was contested. That was one of the ones that they fought against, or the other side of the aisle. They fought against the federal government having the authority to penalize or to ban. So those spaces that work, like I was in Fort Riley, and spaces like that. When you get outside of a military base, there is a thriving city that had been built just for people who wanted to cater to the needs, or the commercial needs, industrial needs of those service members. All right. You can go right outside of a military base. You can find some of the poorest people, because as those waves come in and go of people who will be spending time on that military base, the communities, they either thrive, or the businesses either go up or the businesses go down with the population on those military bases. In that part of the recommendation, they were saying, now these soldiers are getting off work and they want to go inside of the local communities outside of our military bases, and those local businesses are not allowing these soldiers access to food and luxury entertainment, all of those other things. And so that was one of the recommendations that was pushed by. They said they don't like it. That should be a state right, and they shouldn't intervene on behalf of the individual business person. That does not need federal intervention, but that should be the individual. And that's why they've been pushing back against it. The black male leadership, on the contrary, says, well, look, these African Americans, until we get to a space where we have our own grocery stores and in mass, where wherever you go, you can always shop and participate black. You can always do it with the same ease almost. And I don't see us being there in the next 5 years with the same ease criteria. But I do know that no matter where you go, you can find a black business if you so choose to have it. It is an opportunity area for us. While we spend time on social issues, there is an economic issue that has unmet need for the black community, the unmet need in banking, the unmet need in grocery store chains, the unmet need in food oases, the unmet need in childcare. There is an unmet need that African Americans are still responsible for, that we are focused on as men, that does not allow us the luxury to keep blaming, or to blame, or to start blaming, or whatever it is, the wrong target goals. All right, so that one got contested. The federal government passed the Civil Rights Act in 1964, which is, it was actually 1 year later. So it was like December when John F. Kennedy authorized the committee to investigate. They came back with their findings in 1963. Robert McNamara, who was Department of Defense, I think at the time, ended up taking that information, and he was charged to execute on it. Execute on this agenda that this it's race-based legislation, it's race-based politics. It's what it is, exactly what it is. Desegregate these businesses, or they cannot do business with the military folks. Shut them down. The act expanded civil liberties for blacks, so it did increase access to those other spaces in our communities, outside of our communities, and other businesses, non-black businesses, which is why you'll get black pushback, because they're saying, well, look, now you have the black patrons going to white spaces. Of course, black businesses will bring in less revenue. But it likewise carved out biracial and multiracial persons as and I would say unique. I wrote this, but I didn't have space for the word unique, but a unique collective group. Below, we measure officer rank by race and record growth in the group unknown. So the bottom charts that you would see here, it breaks out the rank and grade. What they were looking at was, now that there's been an integrated military, have you done what you need to do inside the military that allow for African-American service members to get an education, to get access to those programs, to get promoted, and equal access to what they do with their recreational time? They did that survey there as of May 2018 on race and ethnic representation in the active component based on the US population. On the very left side, they tell you what those ranks and grades are. They tell you the population percentage of those people. Next to that, that is white. Then next to that is black, Asian, and then so forth. And then the second to the last one there, you see multiracial or the unknowns. All right. So for there, that warrant officer, or what you'll mostly find is that we're enlisted folks. 67%, 18.5% of the African Americans who serve in the active component are that enlisted. They are not an officer in that space or that capacity. That's just under 10%. All right. The multi and unknown was about 7.3% as enlisted, but you'll see 11.5% there in the officer ranks. So I had to add one from the Department of Defense, active duty racial and ethnic representation over time, to show you that while we might be getting there now, that is not always, or was it always the case, that from 1997, only 20 years, since they don't want to go back too far, shows you those same numbers in a different format. The dark blue, or the pillar on the left for the racial category, is 1997. As of 1997, when it was the highest for African Americans to be an officer in the Department of Defense or in the service, it was just over 20%. From 2007 to 2017, those numbers have become stagnant. But you know where you do see the growth in that? In that carve-out group, other and unknown. Because they don't identify as black. They used to probably would have been in that black space. But those mixed race folks who have decided that they are no longer black or a representation of blackness have their own battles to fight now. They have their own carved out group. And that was the initiative pushed forward by JFK to make sure that they had it as such. Won't just leave you there, because this escapism has worked for black men to be able to run to the military and then get the benefits of running to the military as a way of saying, this was my push, this was my fight, this was my pushback. See where I am today, now that I have those government benefits. And I wanted to show you that that was not a benefit that black women had at their leisure or their luxury. That what you would see, and this starts here in 1975, since we've moved past the 60s. People tend to understand the 60s. But as of 1975, the percentage, I showed you the total labor force all the way to and through when that finally cracked. Now, this is the military, so black women finally having access to at least serve. Now, I'm not saying they didn't have roles that supported the military. What I am saying is that they were not in that percentage. You'll see in 1975, of all, they were only about 4% even then. Sharp inclines around 1984 again, or all the way through 1984, it gets flat. Then it moves forward. Enlisted being the bulk of that, officers still being less than 17%. So even when the feminist movement did start to kick up in whatever year that they're going to have that conversation with you in, you're going to ask them, what are the results of that feminist movement that you say has been hijacked, or that has hijacked the leadership of black males and the agendas that black males have fought for and leveraged media to fight for? Show me where and show me when it happened, because the data that I find just doesn't support it. This came from the report pushed by them, Congressional Research Service, Defense Manpower Data Center, Diversity, Inclusion, and Equal Opportunity in the Armed Forces. They ask us, why do you care what we're talking about? And I think I'm gonna have to leave them at this, because like I said, my whole everything, my energy level is not to keep combating people who just don't seem to understand. My energy level is geared towards those people who are moving in an actual intangible space, economically, politically, and operating at a high level. To have the conversation with remedial people is beneath me, and I don't like that shit. Every once in a while, we can give them some information so that they might be informed, but for the most part, I'm not seeing the impact of us giving them that information. So I'll say it again. A black political agenda wins for other diversity groups, but it is not the other way around. A black LGBTQ can win as LGBTQ, but the black political agenda has a specific and focused laser on black. Not the feminist movement, that's women. They have their own struggle. Not the multiracial checkbox group. They have their own struggle. They have their own experiences. And every time we have to turn around and keep having conversations with people who are part of the other group, not from one that wants to grow, not from one that wants to collaborate, not from one that wants to partner and build, but from one that just says the black political agenda is racist and xenophobic. Miss me with that. The black political agenda is one that says we are too busy for the fuck shit. I'll give them one more content. Yeah, I think I have two more. Successful political agendas where black leadership prevailed against racism. This is something that you will not be able to get from having a conversation with someone like a Herman Cain. He's going to tell you about political strategies that work on a personal level. He's going to tell you about accountability and responsibility. He's going to count off on his hands. He's going to tell you about taxes and things like that. None of those have worked for him. There is no 999. There is no restructuring of the tax code. None of that shit worked. As an individual, he can be a franchise owner of pizza parlors. That's where he can call his claim to fame. But if you try to run his track record on successful politics, you're going to find a lot of missed opportunity on even Herman Cain. And this is my Morehouse brother, by the way. And the picture was actually taken there in Morehouse. All right. Failed black political agenda. We can talk about that. There is a lot of that out there. Failed black political agenda. Misalignment with other groups and what they would like to see it accomplished, or even the hijacking where you do have it, affirmative action that then turns around and becomes a loophole to help more white women get to the top. Oh, the very last one would be the product of all of that 1919 to 1930s and the 20s would be the Thurgood Marshall Supreme Court Justice, because it was still about restorative justice for Black veterans who had been lynched. You can broaden that out now and say that it is more than just being about the lynched African American veterans, but their families as well, the descendants of those men and what they went through. If you can see the hardships that were experienced by those African Americans all the way through and through to the political agenda of the 1960s and so forth, then there is hope for you and the conversation is not lost. All right, man, I am actually, oh shit. Well, let's do it. I am actually done with this conversation. I can't believe that the time has flown by as it has, but that is good. I do want to say thanks for watching. That's my template page. As I get ready to get the hell up out of here. Oops. Hey, man, what are you doing on my music? Don't play yourself. What is most important, Midtown, is the legacy of Black leadership that is being undermined by the tenets of these outcasts, these cast out, these self-outcasts, self-inflicted outcasts who feel they've been emotionally, psychologically traumatized by the Black woman. I say how and I say when. If it's just a personal, anecdotal information about your inability to perform in your own household, I don't want to hear that shit. But if they actually feel like systemically or socially the Black woman has aligned herself with feminism or with what white people want to do, and they've done so at the levels that is not an anomaly, it's not just a personal attack, then they can have the conversation with Brother Moses. But until then, we got too much work to do. So let me give them a little bit more and then I'll get the fuck up out of here. When attempting to turn the tides of American racism, systemic oppression, and white supremacy that dominate social, economic, and political democracies across history, one might look to the longest filibuster in history. Senator Strom Thurmond in 1957 was imitating another example of historic precedent from a decade earlier, when Southern state separatist leaders argued for the taking back of their country from a dictatorship. Political position also originating in part from sustained media publicizing racial debate and proposed legislation, which was the Civil Rights Act. Today, it's Trump-triggered nationalists arguing against reparations, being distracted by these Black men who side with those ideas and say, well, we're in a post-racial society. Bullshit. That access that you have to white women is not going to circumvent the Black man's movement, and we still have work to do. I don't have time to be distracted by these whack-ass failures and rejects. They couldn't run their household, so they run their mouth. Strong, the governor, state CEO of South Carolina, said there's not enough troops in the army. Force the Southern people to break down segregation and admit that the nigger race is that race into our theaters, to admit them into our swimming pools, to admit them into our homes and into our churches. His political tactic is just like that of the CISPA movement, was one of a filibuster where he spoke for more than 24 hours straight on racial politics. I'll tell you again, he learned that from the senator of Atlanta who filibustered anti-lynching bills in 1935 that we still haven't gotten past today. See, if I just start with that piece, it goes right over their heads. They would have missed all the education and the information that linked it all together. So if you put it over music and then kind of let it rock out with a little bit more sustained energy, then it works. The Strom Thurmond filibuster, the governor of the state, which is a CEO of South Carolina, and all of that. When we were asking, and we asked them many a times, get your white boys and stop them white boys from coming over into our spaces. And then there was that Negro who went over to those white spaces and tried to date their daughters and made the entire argument about, well, my Black woman at home doesn't love me. And for them, I say, fuck off.